In this world, the gods blessed people with skills that determined their status in society. Elk, the story's protagonist, was the first son of the Kinesis family who had been blessed with a useless skill named telekinesis. Other than Emma, who was the family's loyal maid and Elk's maid with benefits, no one considered Elk to be worth anything, not even his blood siblings, Sarissa and Roshuo. Outside of his useless skill, Elk was also an outcast in his family because his father, the Duke, had only married his mother for political reasons, and she was now deceased. Elk would sometimes try to use his telekinesis power to move small objects, but they barely moved an inch. One night, Elk's dad ordered him to give up his title as heir because his skill made him unworthy. He gave Elk one last chance to prove himself, declaring that if he won in a duel against Roshuo, he would be recognized as the family's heir. But if his brother won, he would have to hand over the title. The battle began, but only a few seconds in, Elk could no longer move his body because he felt heavy. He was pretty sure this was due to his sister's skill, and couldn't believe his family had planned to end his life by using his brother, because it was evident when no one stopped Roshuo from delivering the final blow. Elk died and found himself in a field where he was warmly greeted by a drop-dead gorgeous goddess named Pipina, who told him he was a lost soul in a world between life and death, and was not completely dead. Before he would be sent back to the world, the goddess promised that she would give him a super rare skill if he asked for it. However, Elk said he didn't need any skill, and it was all pointless. The goddess showed him a crying Emma, who was mourning his death and kneeling beside his body at her house, so she told him to make Emma happy by asking for a skill. Instead of a skill, Elk asked the goddess to train him and make him very strong with his telekinetic powers. She promised to grant him his desire, but warned him that training telekinesis would take 2,000 years. Elk felt he'd grow old and die on Earth, but the goddess told him that time flowed differently in her world than in his, and 2,000 years would be only 6 years on Earth. He worried that his body would rot, but she encouraged him that Emma would take care of him, and as long as his soul was in heaven, his body would stay alive and grow. Training began with the basics of telekinesis, where Elk was taught to move things with his mind, the size of which depended on the strength of his ability. His training progressed over the years until he could move an entire mountain with his mind. The goddess told him that with the level of training she had given him, he would easily get revenge on his brother and sister. It was time for him to leave, and the goddess was already missing his strokes, so she kissed him goodbye. Elk woke up in Emma's room, and she embraced him and told him how his family had fired her and ordered her to dispose of his body. She found it difficult to bury him, and in all the time that passed, his body never decayed and was preserved. For that reason, she always believed he would wake up and was now glad that he was here. Their peaceful reunion was ruined by the sudden arrival of orcs in the village. So Emma told him to run, but he jumped out the window, used telekinesis to create a pathway, and threw some debris at the orcs. With the orcs being defeated, the captain of the village guards personally thanked him, and Elk used telekinesis to reassemble the buildings that were destroyed. During dinner, Emma invited him to live with her, and instantly his brain suggested all the positions that'd blow her brains. She then explained that after seeing all he had been through and how he had suddenly become so strong, she didn't want him moving anywhere far. However, he told her he had to return to his family for his revenge. To commence his revenge plan, he asked Emma to enroll in school with him at the Royal Academy, attended by his siblings. Emma felt that a commoner like her had no right to such luxuries. He told her that he would take care of her fees, thanks to the money he got from Pipina. They enrolled in school, and on the first day they befriended two siblings named Nick and Mary, who were in the commerce and combat sections, respectively. They arrived at the ceremony and were led by their student representatives, a guy named Elwood and a girl named Yato. Elwood was the crown prince of their kingdom and a genius born with 3 skills. Later, Elk and the others were headed to the central plaza since Mary had saved them seats, but they arrived to find Mary standing up to some dude who wanted her to give up her seat. The guy, Marcus, was the eldest son of a baron, but Mary didn't care and said that, as a noble, he should be ashamed of threatening people. Marcus moved to slap her and she fell to the ground, but his hands stopped midair and he was furious at Elk, wondering what skill he used on him. When Marcus and his buddy heard that it was telekinesis, they couldn't believe it and were surprised that such a useless skill somehow managed to get Elk into the Noble Academy. However, Elk used Marcus's hand to give his sidekick a nose job until he bled, and the guys knew better than to mess with him, so they left. Later, their class teacher asked them all to introduce themselves, and they all did, until it was Elk's turn and he said his skill was telekinesis. Some dude named Gambo, whose dream was to become a knight, called Elk a weakling who could only move objects and would never compare to a real combat skill. Following his taunt, the teacher suggested that both guys fight each other in a practice match, so Gambo got into his attire, and the match began. As the match began, Elk moved some slabs and slammed them into Gambo, but the guy turned his body into steel and appeared right behind Elk, boasting about how he had never been wounded in his life. He attacked Elk, but Elk repeatedly dodged his attacks and then messed with Gambo's body, hitting him from one end of their space to another. But none of his attacks affected Gambo, so Elk then spun his body around, mimicking a tornado so he'd distort his internal organs and finally make him pass out. It was obvious that at that speed, Gambo had suffered some damage, so the teacher asked that he be taken to the infirmary. However, as Elk was about to be declared the winner of the match, Gambo got up on his feet, saying he was still the man who would end up as a knight in that country. His declaration came from a place of pain, because Gambo was born into a country with nothing other than mineral resources, which made most of its citizens miners. To Gambo, his only treasure was his father, who became a knight, but unfortunately, people mocked his father, saying he was merely the king's servant. So Gambo got into lots of fights in his childhood and gained his skill in the process. He begged his dad to let him go to the nation of Gallatin, where he would study and become a knight. Obviously, he knew his father's sacrifice was much more than the eyes could see, and so, even though he was treated like trash by the nobles, he would fix them up with his violent fists. And so now in the present, he was determined not to fail his father, and Elk knew that even though Gambo was barely conscious, he was activating his skill through sheer willpower. Elk knew that all Gambo was doing was from his heart, so he walked over to him and said he couldn't stand how violent he was, but he was the same at some point. Elk remembered that during his training with the goddess, he hit his limit thousands of times but kept moving because of his desire for revenge. Since Gambo was still showing a fighting spirit, the best Elk could do for him was help him pass out fully, and so he slammed his body over a slab of rock. After the match, rumors spread widely about Elk and Gambo's fight, and their teacher said he had never seen anything of that nature throughout his career. Later, they headed to the cafeteria, but there was a long queue because it was raining outside. Elk went to sit with Gambo, but the big guy told him to shut up and get out. Elk ignored him as he sat with his friends, but Gambo told them he had reserved the seats for Marcus. However, Marcus ignored him because he had shamelessly been defeated by the wimp of the century. Seeing how dejected Gambo looked, Al was allowed to talk to him, but Marcus jerked him by the collar and asked him not to mention anything pathetic. From nowhere, the students started chanting that Elk should deal with Marcus again, and that Marcus would never become a knight. Emma and the other two told them to stop picking on him, but the students kept chanting in favor of Elk dealing with Gambo. However, Elk used telekinesis to shut their mouth up and said that instead of telling him what to do, they should challenge Gambo by themselves if they had the guts. When the room fell quiet, Gambo just walked out and said he had nothing to say to Elk. Elk also left the table and said he had something to do, but Emma was worried because ever since she heard about his revenge plan, she had been on edge, worrying that the kindest person she once knew would change. However, her heart was at peace right now because she knew Elk was worried about Gambo. Gambo was outside, seated in the rain, recalling all the negative comments the haters made about him. So Elk told him to get back inside instead of getting soaked and reminded him that it was his fault because Gambo was the one who mocked his powers during his introduction, forcing Elk to prove that telekinesis wasn't useless. However, Elk knew that Gambo wanted to be a knight more than anyone and had worked so hard to prove it, as he realized during their fight. Gambo asked him what the heck he wanted from him anyway, and Elk extended his hand, saying they should reconcile. Gambo was confused and said they weren't about to act like some dumb girl besties, but Elk went on to call him his friend since they had a fair and square battle. He also told Gambo that Marcus obviously didn't care about him, and that Elk was more of a friend than Marcus would ever be. Gambo received his extended hand and acknowledged that he was wrong for mocking telekinesis and that they would have a rematch as friends. They headed back into the building and saw a flyer announcing one of their academy's top 3 biggest martial arts events. It stated that there were solo battles and 3-person team battles, so they only needed to find one more person before the deadline. Just then, Elk's siblings passed by, saying that their academy was full of nobodies, and only their vain stupidity was enough for Elk to recognize them. Immediately, his anger swelled within him, and he unconsciously used his telekinesis powers to create cracks in the walls, almost lifting everything off the ground. Gambo was worried when he saw Elk in that berserk state, asking what was wrong and stopping him from destroying the entire academy. However, Elk was already out of this world, so Gambo turned his hand into steel and rushed to slap Elk out of his state. Before he got there, his arm of steel was shattered in an instant, so he knew he had to turn his entire body to steel and shrink himself so he could withstand the pressure of Elk's telekinesis. He did so, and had booted Elk out of his state, after which Elk passed out and Gambo was relieved. A week later, on the training grounds where students were practicing mock battles and skill enhancement training, Elk and Gambo were relaxing, and Elk shared that the academy helped him recover with their advanced healing skills, getting him back to full health by the end of the day. When he woke up in his dorm, Emma and Nick told him that both he and Gambo were taken to the infirmary for treatment. The teachers didn't scold him because skill rampages were common for students at their age, and the hallway that was damaged was already repaired. But still, Elk couldn't believe that he lost control like that, so he thanked Gambo for helping him out. Gambo also reminded him that we were supposed to be looking for a teammate for the martial arts tournament, which was only one out of 2 skill tournaments held by the school, one being for combat students and the other for commerce students. However, for Elk and Gambo, finding a third teammate was essential, but the progress had been quite slow thus far. They were just sitting peacefully when someone called out to them and told them to run because a wrecking ball was headed towards them fast. So Elk stopped the wrecking ball using telekinesis, while Gambo stopped his by punching and splitting it. Apparently, it was some sugar mummy who was practicing for the tournament all by herself until a very fast lady stepped into the ring, and it became a full-blown match. The wrecking ball lady threw the ball at her opponent at a very fast speed, but was shocked to see that the girl kept the ball and immediately knocked her out. Elk and Gambo were amazed by the other girl when she suddenly appeared beside them and started acting all friendly with them. The guys said they were not interested in anything that had to do with 2 guys and a girl in a bedroom, but while they left her behind, she suddenly appeared in front of them, using her skill known as acceleration, and then she asked them to display their skills too. When she heard that Elk's skill was telekinesis, she could not believe it because when she had seen him stop the wrecking ball, it didn't look like it was a useless skill that could have achieved that. However, Gambo said he was telling the truth and that he could vouch for what Elk was saying. Eventually, the girl believed what he was saying and said they could come train with her. However, both guys said they would rather surrender their sausages than team up with a crackhead like her. However, she reminded them that they wanted an extra teammate for the martial arts tournament, and it would be nice for her to join their team. Both guys gave it a second thought, realized that the girl's speed and power balanced out very well, and she should be a solid teammate. But they hadn't even fully decided on her when she forced herself on them, and made them regret everything all over again. At the reception later, there were swarms of students applying for a spot in the tournament, with every single person in the skill department thinking they stood a chance to win the tournament. However, Gambo, the idiot, loudly proclaimed that he would be the one standing at the top of the podium. Elk was on his own, just thinking that if his siblings also participated in the event, then the tournament would serve as the perfect stage for revenge, and that he had to keep his teammates out of it since they had nothing to do with it. The class representative, Elwood, was also in the lineup and said it looked like Elk wondered why someone like him was there. The guy said he only wanted to wait in a long queue for the first time in his life because back home, everything was done for him. Seeing that he had 2 forms, Elk asked him if he was applying for both solo and trio matches, and he said yes. Elwood asked if Elk was doing the same, and he said yes, and also said that he had a team of 3 who were heaven-bent on victory. Elwood told him that he should be aware that his own team was good enough to defeat Elk's team because they had the greatest swordsman and magician on their side. Elk wondered why the guy said he was looking forward to their face-off in the tournament, but he just kept quiet about everything. Later, Mary stopped by, saying she would be enrolling in the individual matches to test her sword skills. But Yato chipped in from nowhere that she should cut that out because she didn't even smell like a swordsman. After all, there was no scent of blood or evidence of facing danger in her life. Yato said that Mary would die pretty quickly. You went into the tournament with a sword. She only swung around for fun and said that Mary should rescind her application. After getting insulted, Mary was furious and asked Yato if she would like to have a taste of her swordplay. But Yato said she was genuinely not trying to provoke her, and it was even enough that Mary hadn't even reached for her weapon throughout their conversation. She told her not to draw her sword there because there were many eyes around, and Mary said that they would find out in the tournament whether her sword was just for show. Just before she left, the girl said she was looking forward to crossing swords with Elk and didn't even consider Mary as a worthy opponent. Elk wonders why she chose him out of all people, and he just has to accept that he wasn't the only one with ulterior motives in the tournament. Meanwhile, Elwood returned to his teammates, Sarissa and Roshuo, saying he had turned in the application for the team matches. Sarissa said there was no point in him troubling himself, and she would have sent her peasant friends instead, but he said he was a student just like every other, and he was good. He went himself because he met an interesting guy while he was at it. However, he said no matter how good the guy was, his two team members were much better and victory was as good as theirs. Much later, Gambo and the female teammate were practicing together, but they suddenly became competitive, and Elk had to stop them midair from displaying all their moves because others could be watching and preempting fight patterns. They stopped, and Gambo asked Elk about his combat gear, but he said the girls were rather weird-looking. Gambo explained that both of them wore outfits that matched their skills. For example, Gambo's whole body could become steel, so his outfit was lightweight, while the girl had her gloves and boots custom-made. Elk then said he had no reason to wear anything and would stand on the winner's podium dressed like a clown. Just then, Emma showed up looking worried and said she had a favor to ask of Elk. Days passed by quickly, and it was already the day of the tournament. At the opening ceremony, an opening speech was given by the headmaster, and then a doctor baddie named Nightingale was introduced. Apparently, the doctor was an S-ranked of the highest tier, also one of the 5 stars of their kingdom. She offered to the students that any sort of injury, including death, could be healed within a day, and all students should fight to their heart's content, learning lessons from death, pain, and despair. Meanwhile, Elk's team members were watching the opening ceremony from the waiting room because only top-tier teams from noble backgrounds were allowed to attend in person. They were worried about Elk, who was already late, but he showed up in some pretty cool outfit and got compliments. This all started when Emma rushed in to ask him for a favor, and it was just for her to make a battle outfit for him using her sewing skills. He was excited to see him make wifey advances at him, and it was obvious that he was just trying to get some from Emma. The outfit came out perfect, and Emma assured him that it was sewn from a special fiber used in creating martial arts uniforms, which was super light but very tough. She asked him to stretch out both his arms, and the suit revealed a hidden blade, which was a gift from Gambo, a blade forged from the highest quality iron in his hometown. However, Elk could sense that these ideas didn't spring up from Emma alone. She said that while she was searching for a combat outfit that was easy to move in, Yato advised her to refer to the assassin class from a certain kingdom. Also, she added the mask so that no one would recognize him from his father's kingdom. It turns out she also got help from Nick and Mary, who helped cover the financial costs of everything. Yet, everyone said Emma did the most work, and when Elk thanked her, she broke down crying and said she ought to be the one thanking him and was glad to have a chance to return the favor. After the cute little sentimental moments, Elk and his team were called because they were about to explain the rules for the flag battle. The rules explanation was carried out by a representative team, which turned out to be Elwood and Elk's step-siblings. The prince took to the stage and stood on the podium, declaring that they would fight with honor and integrity until the very end. Elk in his head was mocking them because there was no trace of integrity in his siblings' DNA, since both they and their dad plotted to end him. Gambo noticed that something felt weird about Elk, but he said nothing and only said that the only thing they had left was to win the match and trust each other. Their teacher announced the rules and showed them a bracelet that each team would receive as their flag. Each team was expected to capture the flag of the other team, and the time limit was 7 hours, within which every team must have collected 3 flags. The teams that succeeded in doing this would earn the right to advance to the final round. Also, the battle would divide the teams into 2 groups, those who successfully captured flags and moved forward, and those who were eliminated and sent to the waiting room after losing their flags. He then mentioned that flags could only be taken if the opponent was incapacitated or unconscious, and that a flag could be taken from a fallen opponent. Thereafter, it was time for them to proceed to the battle arena, so Nick and Mary wished them luck, and Gambo suddenly had a strange expression on his face. He randomly bowed, apologizing to Nick and the others for his poor behavior when they first met him, because now he felt he didn't deserve any of their support. However, Mary told him to raise his head because if he was Elk's friend, then he was also their friend, and supporting friends was natural. Seeing this, Elk felt sad and weird about the fact that his friends were cheering him on, and everyone was in good spirits while he was busy seeking revenge without telling everyone what he intended. He was about to confess his plans to everybody, but when he stretched his arm, he found himself in a different place and was later joined by his teammates. The first round of the battle was in a forest-type dungeon known as the Great Sea of Trees. They discussed their plan, and Elk was still worried about how he had yet to reveal his real objective to his teammates, because he wasn't sure whether it would cause them so much confusion in the middle of their important battle. While he was distracted by his thoughts, some darts were fired straight at him, and Finn quickly pushed him out of harm's way, making him confused and wondering why he did not sense the attack coming. Finn told him to use telekinesis already, but before he could, another set of darts was fired at him. Gambo blocked the attack with his steel body, and they all deliberated on the location of their enemy, realizing that the person must have a special skill and was shooting from a distance. Elk discovered that because of him, his teammates almost got wounded, but he didn't know that a couple of trees away was where their enemy was. It was a girl using some 18th century meta-ravens to spy on them, while she and her teammates floated their way to victory, seeing one of them would handle the other two, while the other would face Elk himself. Here is a brief introduction to how skills work in that world. In the past, a skill was merely a way to strengthen the physical body, but as humans evolved, the number of skill variations grew to thousands. Skills were categorized into three main sections: rank, class, and level. Ranks spanned from G to S, and the 5 stars, a group of 5 people who possessed the strongest of skills, were classified as S rank. For the class section, there were 4 primary skill classes. The first was the magic skill, which granted the ability to manifest their mana into elements. The second was the weapon skill, granting the ability to enhance weapons and build them in combat. The third was the body strengthening skill, which granted its user the ability to modify and strengthen the physical properties of one's body. And that was precisely the type that Gambo possessed. The enemies kept throwing darts towards him, and he told them that things like that wouldn't work on him, and he had mastered their trajectory so much that he didn't even have to try to dodge the attacks. However, the enemy used a ricochet, which he hadn't predicted, and it hit him. Also, it seems the person was accurately reading Finn's movements and knew just when to get her. Now comes the last class that was introduced. The last class of magic was fundamentally different, so much so that it was named the unique skill, which Elk possessed. Elk, at that time, had to successfully divert the darts away from his teammates, earning their gratitude. They realized that the dense forest was making things more difficult for them and serving as a perfect camouflage for the enemy team. However, Elk was pretty convinced that there was only one person nearby, and according to his skill, it felt exactly the same as the thorn attack from earlier, and that meant that the person was pretty close. For the third category, skills could be defined in level caps, and when a skill reached its max level, it would evolve and gain new abilities. This was what Elk's team suspected had happened to the one who had been throwing darts, because he only seems to be getting better. Now, speaking about the guy in question, he no longer saw them and felt they were only tricking him into believing that they were taken out and were hiding their presence with smoke and dust. He was glad for the extra time because he would reset his skills and cool down. He realized that Elk was the strongest amongst them because he had a notable awareness of his surroundings while defending the team at the same time. As the guy swung from one tree to another, he was glad that at least Elk would be too distracted, covering for his other teammates, while the guy himself could keep attacking until they lost. He remembered the meeting he held with the other teammates, where they invited the guru who possessed a powerful skill that allowed her to see every single person's skill by looking through a lens. Essentially, it was an appraisal skill, so the needle guy wasn't particularly open to having her on the team because they could use some more battle-inclined skills. She looked at the guy, Rudra, through her lens and said his skill was the needle, which was presently at level 28. He quickly shut her up before she would foolishly leak out everything about his skill to everyone, and their team leader said that with her in the group, they would gain a huge advantage in the tournament by avoiding troublesome skills and going in on users with skills that could be countered. Now it was time for action, and Rudra ventured towards them to find their blind spot. He saw his needles and was convinced, but just then, Fine rushed at him and attacked him with a high kick, saying victory belonged to her team. They had planned earlier on when they went into hiding, and Elk was still covering for them. He apologized to Finn for her injuries, but she told him that the wound was not his fault, and as a team they had to rely on each other. She told him not to carry the burden alone because there were 3 of them, and he should rely on them more often. That was when Gambo said he had an interesting plan that would require both of their strengths to pull off. So back to the present. Fine had just attacked the needle user as they had planned, but in the process of escaping her attack, he was unaware that he was running into a trap, because the moment he was within Elk's line of vision, Elk used telekinesis on him and with tremendous force. He slammed his body against a tree until he passed out. Will Elk's team survive the first round, and how will his revenge plan against his evil siblings play out? If you'd like to find out in part 2, type "would kinesis" in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, give a thumbs up and subscribe for similar content. As always, thanks for watching and see you in the next video.